Welcome back, America. It's a pleasure to have Andy McCarthy on the program. You know, Andy and I haven't spoken for years, and that's on me, not him, because I was rude to Andy, and Andy's the nicest guy in the world. So it's a pleasure to have you back, Andy McCarthy. How are you?
Mark, it's my honor. I couldn't be happier to be back.
Likewise. And let me tell you, you've been spectacular on analyzing what's going on out there. You know, when I attack former federal prosecutors, it's two other networks. It's not our network. Because there are former federal prosecutors and there's former federal prosecutors. I watch this guy Weissman and I think, oh my God, this guy was prosecuting people. Does that ever cross your mind, too, when you look at somebody like that?
You know, Mark, over the years, I think he's gotten so hyper political. He's almost a parody of himself. And when he talks about, who's ethical and who's the embodiment of the rule of law in America, I can only remember the way that he conducted the big investigations that he was in charge of, one of which he got routed in the Supreme Court. I think it was a unanimous
decision. It was unanimous. He destroyed an entire company. Yep.
In the Enron thing, and then of course he got bumped up from that to the Mueller investigation. We all know how that turned out.
He must be tired these days. I mean, I don't know how you do it. I can't go on TV as much as you did. It exhausts me. Does it exhaust you?
I used to get kind of a kick out of it because it's kind of like it's almost like what we used to do as government lawyers. You know, you try to figure out what the strengths and weaknesses of these cases are and strategically what these, various litigants are trying to do. And I've always liked that part of it the best. But I do think it's overwhelming. And even if there are periods of time where it's fun for somebody who does what we've been trained to do, to take a step back and see the way that the system is being used in such a political way, as a political weapon. I think you get the sense of, like, I keep calling it, they know not what they do, in the sense that no matter how you feel about, like, whether it's Trump or whoever else is involved in the crosshairs of these things, if you don't have a legal system that people believe is fair and that everybody gets a reasonably equal shake in, then you can't have a free and prosperous society. The rule of law is a building block in every free and prosperous society that's ever existed for any significant length of time. And if we lose that, I don't think people realize what we lose here. It's not just, you may clean your political enemy's clock one day and feel really good about that. If you destroy this system, you destroy this country.
Mm-hmm. And now we do have the media. I've been playing the clips where they're turning this Hunter Biden thing into, this is how the system's supposed to work. This is a family that's had challenges. Well, excuse me. They're trying to cover this up like the mob covering up a hit, And it went on and on and on, and finally the judge put her foot down, and even then they tried to deal with it. No, and they let statute of limitations run on two other issues.
Yeah, and actually they're going to get away with it in the end. We all talk about the sweetheart plea deal that got blown up a year ago, but that was so appalling. I think it's easy to forget that Weiss, who was only appointed in Delaware with the support of the two Democratic senators there. I mean, this idea that he's a Trump appointee so that they could, we could all trust that the Biden investigation was going to be on the up and up. I don't think there ever was a Biden investigation. All this guy ever did was thwart it at every turn. And even before, he was pushed into the sweetheart deal, which he didn't want to do. He just wanted to make the case disappear. He had delayed for almost 5 years, which means almost through the statute of limitations for most federal crimes by the time he finally took any action. He told the agents that he was being blocked by Biden appointees in the places where, he could have brought tax charges. But I always wondered, What about the gun charges? Because that was in Delaware, which was his district, and that wasn't happening either. But they played this double game where Garland told the public that Weiss was totally independent. He was the decision maker. He would have all the support he needed from the Justice Department. And Weiss was internally telling the investigators who were trying to do the case, gee, you know, my hands are tied because I can't bring the case due to these Biden appointees, and Maine Justice won't give me what I need to, you know, force their hand. So the whole thing was a con job on everybody, but they got away with it for a long time. And now on the back end, because of his delay, I mean, I'm very glad to see the gun case come out the right way finally today. But look, he's not going to get sentenced until later this year, and he's going to be continued on bail pending appeal. The tax case they'll dispose of late enough in the year so he won't be sentenced until after the election. And then after the election, I don't care what Biden says now, he's going to pardon them.
100%.
So, you know, they've won on that score.
Now, this tax case, like the Farrah case, could have, or could, in the case of this tax case, I suppose, have implications for his father, no? Or am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. The thing is that, you know, Weiss, who, you know, has taken this victory lap today, I think what people need to understand is Weiss's objective is and has always been to protect the president. They wanted to shield Hunter as far as they could shield him, but if push comes to shove, he gets thrown under the bus because the objective is to protect the president. So even if you read this long overdue tax indictment, Mark, it's amazing that page after page, I think it runs for 40, 50 pages. The whole thing is money that's generated by profiting off Joe Biden's political influence. But Joe Biden's name, President Biden's name, is not mentioned in the indictment. And what I think people fail to remember in connection with this plea deal that blew up, Weiss signed off on what he called a statement of facts that it looks to me pretty clear that they let Hunter's lawyers draft. And in that statement of facts, he stipulated that the reason Hunter was making so much money is because he's a high-end lawyer and businessman. It wasn't that he was like a ne'er-do-well, drug-addled son of a president who was profiting for a decade over his political influence. It's mind-boggling.
We're here with Andy McCarthy. Andy, you wrote a book a few years back, a New York Times bestseller on the impeachment of Barack Obama.
I did. It was 2014, though, Mark, and nobody seemed to want to talk about that subject back then.
Yeah, but it's very relevant today, isn't it? As applies to
sure
Biden. We may not have the political, muster to do that sort of thing, but the guy violates our immigration laws. He defies 2 Supreme Court rulings. I go on and on and on. This guy really is what the framers had in mind in terms of impeachment, isn't he?
I think so, because the attack, and this is the argument I made with respect to Obama, it's not as easy to see it in a kind of an outrageous way, but it's an attack on the constitutional framework without which we don't have the republic we have. And I think in particular, Mark, the border issue is just, I find it mind-boggling. I mean, we could talk about this all day, I bet, but if you're going to have an impeachment effort against Biden, which they have in the House, I'm not saying that the earning millions of dollars from corrupt and anti-American regimes isn't important. I think it's very important. I've probably written 1 million pieces on it, but the border's got to be the top issue with a bullet if you're going to talk about impeachment.
I agree completely. I've said they're on the wrong road on this thing. People understand the border. It's a clear violation of the Constitution, the take care clause, right?
Yeah, not only that, I think, they're trying to impeach Mayorkas, and I don't want to say that Mayorkas doesn't deserve to be impeached, because I think he does. But and I know that one of the things the framers were trying to accomplish when they created the presidency was to make sure you had accountability in one official, so that that bad policy or worse couldn't be sort of sloughed off onto subordinates. And as bad as I think Mayorkas is, all he's ever done is implement Biden's policy.
You know, it's sad because I think the impeachment clause really goes one way now, and they've destroyed it. You know, the Senate destroyed it the other month when it just dismissed the case. It didn't even hear any information, which, you know, you've studied this. That's not the way it's supposed to work. You're actually supposed to have a trial, whether the Senate majority likes it or not. So that's been changed now. It's been used against Trump twice, I think illegitimately. So that's been changed. Now let's look at the 25th Amendment, Andy McCarthy. The 25th Amendment's a dead letter, too, because you have a vice president, you have a cabinet. They know that Joe Biden has dementia. They know, the whole world knows he's not with it, but they're never going to pull the trigger because they're never going to give up power. So under the circumstances we see today, the 25th Amendment's a dead letter, no?
Yeah, well, I think, Mark, you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the politics of it. I mean, if we were dealing with people who would be inclined to honor their constitutional obligations, they wouldn't be putting Biden up as the nominee. You know, the fact that they're putting him up as the nominee, I think, it underscores what you said, which is that they want power. They realize that, you know, trying to run with Harris is a loser, and trying to coalesce around anyone other than Biden at this point will reveal the internal divisions in the Democratic Party, which are very deep. So they're running with Biden, but they're not running with him because they think he's qualified or compos mentis. They're doing it because they think that's the best chance of toughing it out and winning in November.
I just think these institutions, and you don't have to agree with me, I'm just very concerned they're beginning to collapse. You know, it's one thing to have law, but law doesn't mean justice unless law's done in a proper way. That's not me. That's Basquiat. And then you look at the border. I mean, if you're not going to have a sovereign border, we've seen empires collapse over issues like that. Assimilation. We've had professors like Huntington and others that wrote about this 20, 30 years ago. It's like anti-assimilation in our country right now in these various institutions. So the things that are supposed to keep the country together and the culture and the power, they seem to be falling apart, and it seems intentional to me. To you?
Yeah, well, yeah. I wrote another book a few years back about Muslim Brotherhood ideology in the West, and one of the things I try to point out was that one of the most successful projects that they ever had was the Muslim Students Associations, which started out with just a handful in the Midwest, and by now have like 500 or 600 in campuses. Some campuses, like 3 or 4 of them, across the U.S. and Canada. And it was so successful, they actually had to start a kind of a graduate program, which was called the Islamic Society of North America, which has become the most important Islamist organization in the West. And the point is, this is a counter-constitutional hatred of the West doctrine that we have allowed to grow up on campus for 3 generations, and that has always married up with left-wing radicals. And it just, I find it astonishing, having tried to call attention to this all these years, that like we wake up one morning and we have like Hamas activists on campus and on the big cities in the United States, and everybody's like, gee, how did that happen? Well, you know, you let this go on for 60 years. That's how it happened.
I don't get the sense anything's being done about it either, do you?
No, I think, you know, part of the reason people are so frustrated is they just feel powerless against this. And I think, you know, look, a big part of former President Trump's appeal is that people are looking for a thumb in the eye to this whole edifice that they feel so powerless. I mean, they see their country slipping away. They see these institutions being destroyed. You mentioned impeachment earlier. The reason we have impeachment in the Constitution is because Madison, among the other founders, thought it was indispensable, that if you didn't have a viable impeachment tool in the Constitution, he didn't think the Constitution could work. Yet all of this stuff is disintegrating, and I think people are very frustrated by it, and they want to strike out against it, but they feel powerless. It's really a tough thing.
Well, isn't the reason because so much of what goes on now in our government, really, the people have no input? I mean, you have a massive bureaucracy that issues more laws than Congress could ever dream of issuing, changing everything from the appliances in our home to the combustion engine to God knows what. You have courts that are increasingly political. We have appointees, Biden's making, others, for that purpose, and yet they have lifetime appointments. So these things that are going on, the disconnect between even voting, even when we win elections, the mandates are sort of sabotaged. When the left wins elections, they just build up the Leviathan even more and they advance their cause. So it's almost one way, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. The only way I think it gets pushed back is it's all dependent on this kind of this uncontrolled debt spending that has to explode at a certain point. But the thing that you really worry about, but I say this as somebody who did national security stuff for a long time, terrorism cases. You always hope that this isn't true, but sometimes it just takes something terrible to happen before people realize that they're on the brink of losing everything.
But the problem is when that happens, it can go either way.
Yep.
You know?
That's a dire circumstance can always go either way. That's what makes it dire, and I think we're in it.
Well, let me say this. It's a pleasure to have you on. We'd love to have you again, and keep up the good work, brother.
Pleasure was all mine, Mark. Thanks so much.
All right, Andy. God bless. He's a good guy. Really, really good guy. Smart as hell.